Mein Name ist Jana Baumann und als Kuratorin der Ausstellung von Miriam Cahn freut es mich, dass dieser Abend anlässlich von Miriams Ausstellung Ich als Mensch stattfindet. Gerne möchte ich auch Miriam begrüßen. Du bist heute Abend anwesend hier, worüber sich das Team sehr freut. Mein Dank gilt allen, die an diesem Abend mitgewirkt haben, insbesondere Andrea Saul. Lassen Sie mich kurz erwähnen, dass nach der einstündigen Performance die Möglichkeit besteht, ein paar Fragen an Käthe Kollwitz aus dem Publikum zu richten. Nun würde ich einmal die Sprache wechseln. Let me say a few words about what connects Miriam Cahn and the Guerrilla Girls. Miriam's studio is located in a valley behind the Engadine in Switzerland and on the border with Italy. On my first visit there, I was impressed not only by this wonderful place to work, but also by the abundance of books that surround Miriam Cahn and with which she lives. Among other things, there were various original photographs of the Guerrilla Girls on the bookshelves. And I also discovered one or two posters of an anonymous group of feminists. The Guerrilla Girls were founded in New York in 1985 with the aim of laying bare and naming instances of gender inequality and discrimination against minorities in the international art world. Over the impressive commitment against sexism and racism in the art world, I asked on which occasion these photographs of the Guerrilla Girls that I had seen on the bookshelves were taken. Miriam Cahn responded that it was in 1990 at a symposium in Basel at the Museum für Gestaltung, which she had co-organized, to which she had invited the Guerrilla Girls. Today, I hold a flyer for this symposium in my hands, in which one can read. For 3 days, women will create a public forum on the themes of identity, career, the bodies, and politics, within the context of which they will present their work from the last few decades. What actually happened during the last few decades? Already in the face of increasing public politicization and emerging new forms of protest around 1968, Miriam Cahn had begun early on to question gender-specific role relationships and the discrimination associated with this. She herself took an active part in the women's movement in Switzerland, which stood up for the rights of women. Gender equality is a human right, a slogan that led to the introduction of women's suffrage in Switzerland in 1971, as an imperative of the European Conventions on Human Rights. During her studies, Miriam Cahn was not only involved in the activist scene, but was also part of an exciting field of creative energy in Basel. At the time, she participated in the avant-garde that tried to redefine its relationship to society. In 1979, she carried out one of her first actions, unobserved at night, with a guerrilla strategy, so to speak. The action was titled "My Womanness is My Public Part." She placed this sentence along with other monumental charcoal drawings as a form of protest in outdoor public space. The canton of Basel responded by accusing the artist of vandalism. Miriam Cahn made the private the intimate public. So a shift of role of women into the outside world, and continues to this very day. On the occasion of Miriam Cahn's first solo exhibition at Kunsthalle Basel in 1983, Theodora Fischer wrote in the accompanying catalogue, "Women have no history of their own. They are guests, strangers within the history of men." When the Guerrilla Girls were founded as a group of 7 female artists in the spring of 1985, this was in response to the exhibition, an international survey of recent painting and sculpture at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. It was the inaugural exhibition of the newly renovated and expanded MoMA building and was intended to provide an overview of the world's newest, most significant contemporary artists. The Guerrilla Girls were shocked by the fact among the altogether 165 artists represented in the exhibition, only certain were women. In times of renewed flare-ups of nationalism, sexism, populism, and contempt for pluralism, Miriam Cahn's work has not only taken an enormous significance, but engagement such as that of the Guerrilla Girls is of central importance for a radically expanded understanding of the role of women in art historiography as well as of their function within society. On the way back from Bergell to Munich, shortly before nightfall, I drove the Julia Pass and to avoid the first snow and was already looking forward to the project with Miriam. My thoughts wandered around and I thought that Miriam might actually be one of the Guerrilla Girls. But that can't be the case, obviously, since you're sitting here tonight. I would like to express my gratitude for Miriam's idea to invite the Guerrilla Girls to Munich on the occasion of her exhibition. The members of the Guerrilla Girls, such as Frida Kahlo and Käthe Kollwitz. How large the group actually is and who belongs to it is not known. The protest actions and the public appearance of Guerrilla Girls draw attention to the exclusion of women and minorities in the art world, including the art market worldwide. We are pleased to welcome them here today, so please join me in welcoming the founding member Käthe Kollwitz with a round of applause.
Okay, well, it seems a little loud. I brought some special feminist bananas if anyone's hungry. If I throw them, I may kill you, so I'm terrible throwing, but anybody want a banana? How about a handing banana for safety? But somebody must be a good catch, right? How about you guys? Oh, not so good, okay. I got plenty more though. Oh yeah, I'm gonna get to everybody. I even have some extras on stage. May I? Thanks. Okay, let's go over here. Oh yes, of course, bananas. Okay, good. One down. Who was raising their hand before? Okay, you got it. Oh wait, I got more. No worries. Yeah, excellent. A lot of banana people. Okay, here it comes. Yes. I'm getting better, you can see, as I go through this great audience. Okay. And I have a few more. Oh, some front row people. Ah, good catch. All right, I'm trying for you now. Oh, well, 3 people dead. Okay. Couple more. All right, should I throw way in the back? Are you ready, people in the back? Okay. All right, that's better. Okay, anybody else? Oh, jeez. Okay. Okay. There is a good principle that created order, light, and man, and an evil principle that created chaos, darkness, and women. Pythagoras, 6th century BC. Girls begin to talk and stand on their feet sooner than boys because weeds grow more quickly than good crops. Martin Luther, 1533. Dear group of communists, you're the strongest bunch of bitches gang together ever seen in world of art. Don't think to career you will make at 80. Best work of art a woman can make is in bed, making love, and maybe procreating non-idiot females. Feminism is reason for high number of AIDS statistics in United States of America. Thanks to you, bitch feminists, if weakest men become gay, a woman can be genius. Do you remember the Holy Virgin, you damn bunch of whores? Answer me if you have the courage, bunch of bitches. That's a letter to the Guerrilla Girls from an Italian art critic. So, where's my click? It's a tough time, I know you told me to. It's a tough time all over the world right now. Demagogues and nationalists are on the rise. Corruption and inequality gets worse every day. And some of you out there may be just as pissed off and nervous as the Guerrilla Girls are, about Trump having access to the US nuclear codes. So we need to start tonight by all letting out one huge collective scream. 1, 2, 3. Ah! Here's a poster that we did right after the 2016 election. President Trump announces new commemorative months. Now in the US, we commemorate the heritage and struggle of marginalized groups during chosen months. But with Trump, that's kind of all beginning to change. And you can read what the regular months, the celebratory months, are becoming in his administration. Okay, so before I go further tonight, I want to thank the great artist Miriam Cahn, and also who, along with the Haus der Kunst, invited me to be here today. And Miriam, I found a great quote from her where she said, "Anger is a very good motor for art." And the Guerrilla Girls completely agree. I'm Käthe Kollwitz. I'm one of the founders of the Guerrilla Girls, and I've been involved with just about everything the group has ever done. We're intersectional feminists who have devoted our lives to fighting for human rights for everyone. We expose discrimination in the art world and beyond, and fight against the takeover of art and culture by the rich and powerful. And I'm really glad to see all of you here today, because now and in the future, we do have power to change art, change the system, and change our culture. All right, imagine it's a few decades ago. Imagine your artist pissed off that almost all the opportunities in the art world go to white men. Imagine you go to a protest outside the Museum of Modern Art in New York after it opens an international exhibition with 116 artists, only 13 of whom are women and only 8 are artists of color. You see immediately on this picket line that no museum goer even cares. That's your aha moment. You realize there has to be a better way, an in-your-face, unforgettable way to break through people's preconceptions and prove to them that the art system is not a meritocracy where museums, galleries, critics, and collectors always know best. Imagine you dream up a new kind of street poster to wake people up. You call a meeting, decide to be anonymous, name yourselves Guerrilla Girls, and take the names of dead women artists as pseudonyms. You pass the hat around to pay for printing the first posters, and within weeks, you're sneaking around New York in the middle of the night, carrying stacks of posters and buckets of glue. Over 60 individuals become members of the Guerrilla Girls, some for weeks, some for decades. They're cis, lesbian, and transgender, diverse in age, sexual orientation, class, and from many ethnic backgrounds: South Asian, Asian, African American, Latinx, European, etc. Your work ignites a public argument about racism and sexism and corruption in the art world. What follows? Hundreds of posters, street banners, books, performances, workshops, videos, exhibitions, not only about the lack of diversity in art, but also in film, politics, and pop culture. So who knew that we, the agitating outsiders, would eventually wind inside museums we criticize, like the Museum of Modern Art, New York, Tate Modern London, where a room of our posters is on display, and the Reina Sofia in Madrid. And of course, we love the street best, and we're still doing street projects all over the world, including Rotterdam, Mexico City, Istanbul, Athens, Shanghai, and the Kochi Biennale, India, several months ago. This was the first Biennale ever which had over 50% women, and where we met so many great artists from all over South Asia and Asia. Retrospectives of our work have been held in Bilbao, Madrid, and the Museum of Art Sao Paulo. Oops, I went too far. In Brazil, that is the Museum of Art Sao Paulo. Of course, we've never had one in New York City, where we're all from. We've been lucky to do this work, and we're so grateful to the thousands of people all over the world, age 8 to 88, who write telling us that we've inspired them to do their own crazy, creative kind of activism. And there is so much creative activism out there today. When we began, the powers that be in the art world claimed discrimination wasn't their fault. So we pointed fingers at all of them for contributing to a biased system. Our first two posters targeted fellow artists and their galleries. Next, we went after museums, critics, and the New York Times. Whenever we put up new posters, we would lurk in the streets nearby, hear what people had to say, and get ideas for the next ones. And this is an example of how bad things were. You know, we were not complaining because there wasn't 50% this or 20% this. We were complaining about 0, 0, 1, 0. And it was even harder for women of color, so we did this intersectional poster. Only 4 galleries in New York show black women. Only 1 shows more than 1. But soon the word on the street was, the Guerrilla Girls are a bunch of whining complainers. So negative. So we took this criticism to heart and realized we had to do a poster to help artists be more positive about their situation. The advantages of being a woman artist. Like working without the pressure of success, knowing your career might pick up after you're 80, being included in revised versions of art history, not having to undergo the embarrassment of being called a genius, and getting your picture in the art magazines wearing a gorilla mask. Now, this poster has been translated into many, many languages, and hardly a week goes by when we don't get letters from people in fields as diverse as mortuary science, veterinary science, music, physics, etc., telling us this poster is the story of their lives too. So a few years later, we were invited to do a billboard in Manhattan, and we thought, it was time for us to try this crazy voice we developed on a large, much larger audience. So we went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art to conduct what we have affectionately come to call the weenie count. We counted naked males versus naked females in the artworks. So when we went through the classical sections of the Met, most of the naked figures were male. When we toured the early Christian sections, there wasn't any flesh at all. In the Renaissance and Baroque paintings, the only fully frontal naked figure we could find belonged to the baby Jesus. It was only when we arrived in the 19th and 20th century, the modern era, when sex replaced religion as the major preoccupation of European artists, that we found this statistic. And here's our poster. Do women have to be naked to get into the Met Museum? Less than 5% of the artists are women, but 85% of the nudes are female. So we like to think our work has made a big difference in the art world, but old habits die hard, and some museums are still lagging behind. So every once in a while, we go back to the Met and recount, and this is our latest recount. We're always sure it'll get much better. Fewer women artists and more naked males. Is this progress? In the mid-1990s, the buzzword in the US art world was multiculturalism. Art institutions were playing catch-up, showing one or two artists of every marginalized group. But instead of showing the great diversity of artists from these groups, they showed the same ones over and over. So we decided to do a campaign about tokenism, the practice of choosing one woman or artist of color and considering the problem of diversity was solved. Because we feel it is not a solution in its own way, it's great, but it can also be a continuation of the problem. Top 10 signs that you're an art world token. And every one of these things happened to some member of our group. Your busiest months are February, Black History Month, March, Women's History, April, Asian American Awareness, September, Latino Heritage, October, LGBTQ History and Disability Awareness, and November, Native American History. Whenever you open your mouth, it's assumed you speak for your people, not just yourself. Everyone ends up telling you their interracial, gay, and transgender sexual fantasies. And a museum that won't exhibit your work gives you a prominent place in its lecture series. Recently, we've been busier than ever, and we've also been faced with kind of a huge dilemma. What do you do when the system you've spent your life attacking suddenly embraces you? In 2005, we were asked to do a large-scale installation at the Venice Biennale, and these days our work is exhibited at major museums all over the world. In fact, in the last year and a half, we've been in over 60 exhibitions. So what's an activist to do? Truly, we really, I'm making a joke of it, but we have really agonized over this. But we felt we had to make the decision to participate in exhibitions and appearances at museums because we want our message to get out to as large an audience as possible. And let's face it, it's also a thrill for us to criticize art institutions right on their own walls. So here's what we did in Venice. We did an installation of 6 17-foot-high posters that were the first thing viewers saw in the main exhibition hall of the Arsenale. We took on the Biennale itself, documenting 110 years of discrimination, but we also declared it the first feminist Biennale. Why? Well, it had the first women directors ever and, surprise, the highest number of women artists ever. We also took on the museums of Venice. We did some research and we discovered that every historical museum of Venice, except for one, has work by female artists in their collection, but almost all of it is kept in the basements, not on the walls. So we appropriated the iconic image of Marcello Mastroianni straddling Anita Ekberg from the famous Fellini film La Dolce Vita, and we asked the question, where are the women artists of Venice? And the answer, underneath the men. Then we demanded that viewers go to these historical museums and demand to see more women on top. Then the Washington Post gave us a full page as part of a special section in their newspaper on feminism. So we decided to design our very own tabloid, Not Okay, the Guerrilla Girls Scandal Rag, to reveal the shocking truth about the low number of women and artists of color in the United States National Art Museums. Horror on the National Mall, thousands of women locked in basements of DC museums. Now down on the bottom are a whole bunch of statistics. We got these statistics from the museums themselves or from their websites. But when the Post called to fact check the night before this was to be published, the museums went bananas. The National Gallery of Art hurriedly installed a Martin Puryear sculpture so they would have at least one and only one African American artist on exhibit. and the Hirshhorn Museum suddenly found works by women it never knew it owned. Of course, this just shows you, I think you can read all this, but the numbers were just so pathetic. National Gallery of Art, 98% male, 99% white, and basically that's our national taxpayer-funded museums. You know, lots of museums have the names of dead white males inscribed on their facades. And we've always wondered, is this part of the problem? So our solution, we gotta replace names like Leonardo and Michelangelo with artists like Artemisia Gentileschi, Frida Kahlo, Rosa Bonheur, Alma Thomas, and Claude Cahun. And speaking of Claude Cahun, we wrote about Claude in a history book we wrote, The Guerrilla Girls' Bedside Companion to the History of Western Art. Claude Cahun lived in France in the mid-20th century and made self-portraits in all kinds of gender roles. Sorry, too far. Yes, is there one here? Oh, yeah. Claude was born Lucy Schwab. Claude's life partner and step-sibling, Suzanne Malherbe, also renamed himself, becoming Marcel. Some books on surrealism list Claude as a man, others as a woman. The Guerrilla Girls think art history needs some new vocabulary to describe artists like Claude Cahun. You know, we love art and artists, but let's face it, the art world, the art system sucks. There are collectors, curators, and donors who advocate for a different art world and collect all kinds of work by diverse artists. But the art world is also filled with poseurs, snobs, gamblers, tax dodgers, insider traders, and even criminals. And here is one of the formerly top New York gallerists who's going to jail for the kind of business she ran, Mary Boone. Because the art market is unregulated. In fact, it's described as the fourth largest black market in the world after drugs, guns, and diamonds. So here's a little bit of our version of the history of art museums taken from another book we wrote, the Guerrilla Girls Art Museum Activity Book. A brief history of museums. It all began because wealthy people have always had a lot of stuff. When kings, queens, emperors, and aristocrats ran out of space in their palaces and churches, they needed somewhere to store it all. So they started art museums. In many countries, museums became part of the government and are run by bureaucrats and civil servants. In the United States, most museums, and it's happening more in Europe, including here to some extent. In the US, most museums are funded and overseen by super wealthy art collectors, the 1% of the 1%. Books, music, films, they're cheap. They can kind of be owned by everyone, but art is expensive. Only the rich can buy it. And once collectors spend all that money on artworks, they want their investments to appreciate in value, which usually happens when the work is shown in a museum. Now, it doesn't take a genius to realize that this system is so ripe for corruption. In other fields, this kind of insider trading is illegal. Okay, let's take a short art world quiz. What does art by famous females cost compared to famous males? 14%. The highest auction sale ever for a living female artist, $12.4 million for a Jenny Saville painting of a nude female, was only 14% of the record $90.3 million recently paid for a David Hockney. Can you make money from a museum while you're on its board of directors? Hell yeah, you can. $11 million says yes. Count Giuseppe Panzo was paid for selling part of his art collection to the Museum of Contemporary Art in LA. while he was on the board. He also sold other work from his collection to the Guggenheim that year for $30 million. What's one of the economic forces behind the new Guggenheim Museum in Abu Dhabi? It's called debt bondage. Foreign workers at the Guggenheim and in the surrounding luxury zone are hired from South Asia and flown to the Emirates. When they get there, their passports are confiscated and their pay is nothing like what they were promised. They're forced to live under inhumane conditions, like the kind of barracks. This is one of the barracks that you can see there. What's more important to the Metropolitan Museum in New York than free speech? Money. The Met recently accepted $65 million from the ultra-right-wing Koch brothers, oligarchs who spend even more than that trying to undermine US elections. So what did the Met do after getting their dirty money? They held a big party, then called in the cops to arrest a group of artists who protested outside the museum by projecting this big image, tagging the Kochs as climate change deniers. Now, speaking of billionaires, we did a stealth campaign in New York just for them. We put up stickers about income inequality going after art collectors, galleries, and museums. We also did a stealth projection on the facade of the Whitney Museum in New York with the help of the Illuminator Collective.
So the world of artists is great, but the art world sucks. The super rich are controlling the museums, sitting on the boards.
Power is being centralized into these few rich people. Like, it's really about the 1%.
Unfortunately, the art world right now appears to be about money and about the production of luxury items.
Billionaires are making more and more and more, and their taste controls which artists get the big bucks and get the opportunities and get the shows. We're planning to sneak around New York with the Illuminator. So we'll be starting out in Chelsea, and we hope to then go to the Whitney. So we had this idea to do something we could do really fast around New York and put these stickers up. Some of the stickers are about art galleries, about billionaires, billionaire collectors, and about museums. So we wanted to put them up where they belong, on the big galleries, on the museums, and give them out to people, especially so they could do the same thing. And it seemed like a great idea. Call people together, just put the word out, see who comes, and just run around the streets and put these things up and bother people.
It's going to be a Saturday in Chelsea. People walking around feeling really good about having seen all this inspiring art, and all of a sudden they're going to see the wall above start talking to them. And it's going to say, "Dear art collector, we completely get collecting art is so expensive. We really understand why you can't afford to pay all your employees a living wage." The wall is going to talk to them. Every time we put something up, people would go bananas. Some people would love it, some people would hate it. So we would sort of work in that space. It's really very productive to provoke people to think about things. And we discovered early on that if you could make someone who disagreed with you laugh, you had a hook inside their brain. Once you were in there, you just might be able to change their minds about things.
All right, so we think a lot about museums. And in 2016, we opened 2 projects in London, both about museums. At the Whitechapel Gallery, we decided to find out what museums think about themselves, since we're always telling them what we think about them. So we sent out 383 questionnaires to art institutions all over Europe and the UK, and made an exhibition from the 101 responses we received. Oops, I gotta go back. Wait, we had trouble with this before, didn't we? Or maybe I'm not.
So the work.
Oh, sorry. Okay, that's our exhibition of what we received. Now, as for the 282 institutions that did not respond, we put their names on the floor and invited people to walk on them. Now, here's a little bit about what we found out. Only 2% of the responding institutions have more than 40% women artists in their collection. Nevertheless, a Finnish museum told us that women artists have been hugely important to them since 1861. But today, they only have 12% women in their collection. The Reina Sofia claims they think about diversity all the time, but their collection is still 87% men. Billionaire art collector Dakis Ioannou told us that gender and race are not important at his private art museum. The only thing that matters is pure talent. So we asked in our little comment, what planet does he live on? The show ended with this statement: don't let museums reduce art to the small number of artists who have won a popularity contest among big-time dealers, curators, and collectors. Unless museums show art that is as diverse as the cultures they represent, they are not showing the history of art. They're just preserving the history of wealth and power. And at Tate Modern, we created the first ever, but not the last, Guerrilla Girls complaints department. Thousands of people came to complain. We had all this space for them to complain, and thousands did. A lot of them complained about art, but they also complained about gender issues, racism, politics, personal issues, and of course, the museum itself. Then there's just some more stuff. Some of the things people wrote were really amazing. Our complaints department traveled to Brazil in 2017, and we really think the perfect place for it would be Washington, D.C. We may have to have something on wheels, so when they start chasing us, we can escape, maybe. I don't know. You know, this past year has seen protests at the Metropolitan Museum, which I showed you, in the Guggenheim, over contributions from the Sackler family. I'm sure everyone's been reading about this, who manufacture opioids, and at the Whitney against trustee Warren Kanders, who makes the tear gas used on the refugee children and families Trump is sticking at the Mexican border. And we had done a poster in 1989, the Guerrilla Girls Code of Ethics for Art Museums. And we decided it was really time to update it for today's issues. And this poster, the Guerrilla Girls Code of Ethics for Art Museums Monument, is about to go up, maybe it's up already, sometime in September, on the High Line in New York City. So there'll be all these big posters of it up there. And it's a little hard to read, so I'll read it. I have it down. The Guerrilla Girls Code of Ethics for Art Museums. If thou exhibit art mostly by white males, bought at the most expensive galleries, then donated by wealthy collectors, thou must renameth thyself the Museum of Billionaires' Art. Thou shalt honor thine employees and pay all of them a living wage plus health insurance. Yeah, and is this a big issue here too? This is a huge, huge issue in the United States. It's pathetic. Thou shalt not permit billionaires who sell deadly addictive drugs, make tear gas, deny climate change, or undermine elections to art wash their reputations with huge donations and get their names on museum plazas. And we set our poster outside the Met with the David Koch Plaza. Sadly, David Koch died a couple of weeks ago. Unfortunately, his money lives on to do more damage. And thou shalt admit, if thy museum does not show art or hire staff as diverse as the culture thou claim to represent, thou art not showing the history of art, thou art merely telling the story of wealth and power. So we plan to actually make a kind of mock-up of this on wheels, not marble, something we can roll around easily, and take it to museums, take it around New York to museums. And we could lend it out. We're thinking of something that we can fold up and kind of put up and stick on the street. So if anybody wants to do that, we're getting that together slowly. The poster version you see here has already been in Texas, Chicago, and Toronto, and as I said, now up on the High Line. So last year at Art Basel Hong Kong, we were invited by the Asia Art Archive to critique one of the biggest art fairs in the world, right inside the fair itself. So we took a quote from Confucius, which said, "If you keep women away, they get resentful." And we created a participatory installation, so visitors to the fair could do their own gender count. We gave out these little pieces of paper so everybody could go to the fair, write their opinions, or actually count stuff that was going on of all the big-time fancy galleries there. We also collected a bunch of statistics with the help of Hong Kong University about Hong Kong itself. And here's an interesting one, because everywhere we go, if you notice, Hong Kong art schools, women artists, 82%. Every place we've been, there's been a vast majority, maybe not 82%, but the majority of students are women. But after school, the majority of professional opportunities go to the male grads. And there are statistics today on ArtNet saying that even though museums are all talking about being more diverse in terms of women, this particular article addressed only that. Only the collections of major museums in the United States are still 11% women, and in the last 10 years, only 14% women have had solo exhibitions. Okay, let's leave the art world for a while and go to Hollywood. So, this is an area of the US culture that's even worse than the art world. The film industry wants to think of itself as edgy and progressive and ahead of the curve. But if you look behind the scenes at writers, directors, editors, you find almost all of them are white males. So for several years, we've rented billboards in Hollywood, just a few blocks from where the Academy Awards are held. And for our very first one in 2002, we decided to put a little realism into the Academy Awards. So we redesigned the Golden Boy to look more like the guys who take him home. The anatomically correct Oscar. He's white and male, just like the guys who win. Okay, so we had to back up this outrageous statement with the facts, as we usually do. And these were the facts in 2002. No woman had ever won Best Director. 94% of the writing awards had gone to men, and only 3% of acting awards have been given to actors of color. Now that was the very year both Denzel Washington and Halle Berry won Oscars for their performances. And we're convinced, of course, that it was due to our billboard. Now, a few years later, Monique, Octavia Spencer, and Lupita Nyong'o became the 5th, 6th, and 7th Black women in 86 years to win Oscars for acting. Jeffrey Fletcher and John Ridley became the first black men to win for screenwriting. And Catherine Bigelow became the first woman to win Best Director. She was only the fourth ever nominated in the 86 years. Then last year, Jordan Peele won an Oscar for Best Screenplay, and this year, Black Panther won 3 Oscars, but should have won Best Picture. And of course, we take credit for all of that as well. This year, this is just an aside. We sometimes update our things whenever we can. So these are 3 of our earlier billboards in 2016, updated during the Oscars So White scandal with new statistics. That's 1, that's a 2, and that's anatomical, updated on the streets of Minneapolis. This year we did a little updating too. We updated our 1999 sticker comparing Hollywood to the Senate, only to find out that the Senate still sucks, but Hollywood sucks even more. And these are the statistics. It didn't, there are a lot more female senators suddenly in the US, but same amount of female directors. We've also done lots of political posters about many, many issues. I'm just going to show, really one tonight to kind of foreground that whole part of our practice. This is a street poster. Oh, this is just more political things from marches and things like that. Let's see if I have another one here. No. This is a street poster about misogyny and violence against women that we did on the streets of Montreal on the 20th anniversary of their worst mass murder ever, when a gunman claiming he was fighting feminism killed 14 women studying engineering at the École Polytechnique. Our poster is a graffiti wall of sexist hate speech through the centuries, including, here's some of the ones, including Confucius, who said 100 women are not worth a single testicle, Pat Robertson, an American evangelist preacher, who said feminism is a socialist and anti-family movement that encourages women to leave their husbands, kill their children, destroy capitalism, and become lesbians. Let's applaud that. I think that's a good thing. It struck us that it's still okay to publicly say things about women and trans women that wouldn't be tolerated if said out loud about any other groups. And a case in point, of course, is Donald Trump, who brags about grabbing pussy and calls women low IQ dogs, and is particularly cruel and racist toward women of color. Close to half of all women and many men and trans people have been sexually harassed and or abused in the workplace. People in power, mostly guys, do it, and other people in power let them get away with it over and over again. Now so many of us are speaking out. We're saying Me Too, we're saying Time's Up, and in the art world we're saying Not Surprised. Our newest work is about how museums should deal with the Me Too movement. We decided they needed a little help figuring it out. To set the stage, this is the official portrait of President Bill Clinton at the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C., painted by an artist, Chuck Close, who, like Clinton, has been accused of multiple cases of sexual abuse. And here's our poster. 3 ways to write a museum wall label when the artist is a sexual predator. Number 1, for museums afraid of alienating billionaire trustees and collectors. And here's our wall label. Chuck Close, American, born 1940, Monroe, Ohio. Chuck Close is one of the most important artists of his generation, and the creator of a new kind of portraiture consisting of patterns of color. Number 2, for museums conflicted about disclosing an artist's sexual abuse next to his art. Is this the right one? Yes. Chuck Close, American-born, 1941, blah, 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 blah. Chuck Close is one of the most important artists of his generation and the creator of a new kind of portraiture consisting of patterns of color. Like many artists, he has had a few disgruntled models and employees. Well, label number 3, for museums who need help from the Guerrilla Girls. Chuck Close, American, blah, 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 blah. Chuck Close has had a huge career with prices to match. He's been accused of sexually abusing models and students he picked up at fancy art schools. How fitting and ironic that he painted the official portrait of Bill Clinton. The art world tolerates abuse because it believes art is above it all, and rules don't apply to genius white male artists. Wrong. This project has kind of caused all hell to break loose. Curators and art magazines have politely turned it down after asking for work from us. They might be the ones who need our help too. It, however, recently went on exhibit at an auction house in New York City, which was pretty bizarre. And it's also part of Beyond the Streets, a massive street art exhibition that was in Los Angeles last year, and this is our installation in the New York show, which is still has been on all summer. You know, the Guerrilla Girls really formed to do street art. I mean, that was our original idea, formed to put posters on the streets, and we still do street projects all over the world. But the last few years in Helsinki and in LA and New York, the first time ever that we've been in shows with other street artists, and it's been really great. The work is wonderful. It's great to see all this stuff all at once, this incredible melange of art on the street. So a few years ago, the Art Institute of Chicago invited us to deliver a commencement address in front of cheering students and some angry parents. We gave the graduates some surprising and unexpected advice, which was something just read at the time. But afterwards, we kind of liked what we said to them so much. It kind of distilled a lot of the stuff I've talked about tonight and a lot of stuff we've done all the years, that we made that manifesto into a video. And I'm going to end with that tonight.
The Guerrilla Girls Guide to Behaving Badly, which you have to do most of the time in the world as we know it.
Be a loser. The world of art doesn't have to be an Olympics where a few win and everyone else is forgotten. The art market and its hyper-competitive celebrity culture makes everyone but the stars feel like failures. But there's another world out there that's not about raging egos, a world of artistic cooperation and collaboration. That's the one we joined, and we invite you to join it too. Let's make trouble together.
Be crazy. Political art or activism that points to something and says this is bad is just preaching to the converted. Instead, try to change people's minds and do it in some unforgettable way. A trick we learned is humor helps you fly under the radar. If you can get people who disagree with you to laugh at an issue, you have a hook right into their brain. Once there, you have a much better chance to convert them.
Be anonymous. Sometimes you gotta speak out publicly, but sometimes it works even better to speak out anonymously. Now this has its disadvantages, like working your whole life without getting any credit, but it has lots of advantages too. Our anonymity, for example, keeps the focus on the issues and away from our personalities. The mystery of who we might be draws lots of attention to the issues we promote. Plus, you won't believe what comes out of your mouth while wearing a gorilla mask.
Be an outsider. Even if you're working inside the system, we say act like an outsider. Seek out the understory, the subtext, the overlooked, and the downright unfair. Then expose it. Jam your culture. Remake your institution.
Just do one thing. If it works, do another. If it doesn't, do another anyway. Don't be paralyzed if you don't get it right every time. Just keep chipping away. We promise that bit by bit, your efforts will add up to something effective.
Artists, don't make only expensive art that billionaire art collectors can afford. Curators, don't exhibit only the expensive art your trustees donate. Let's have more cheap art that everyone can own, like books, zines, music, and movies, like our posters.
Show museums tough love. It's unethical that wealthy art collectors who invest lots of money in art can become museum trustees overseeing institutions that in turn validate their investments. It's a lousy way to write and preserve our history.
Demand ethical standards inside museums. No more conflicts of interest or insider trading. No more cookie-cutter collections of art that cost the most. Convince art collectors their collections are inferior with only work by white male artists. Don't let museums perpetuate this version of art and power with a few tokens thrown in. Make sure your favorite museum casts a wider net and collects the whole story of our culture.
Whether you work in a museum or a classroom, don't teach an art history constructed by corrupt institutions. Do like we did. Write your own.
Complain, complain, complain. Be a creative complainer. Be a professional complainer. Don't assume people know what's missing from museums. Remind them how many modern and contemporary art collections still contain less than 15% females and artists of color.
Use the F word, feminism. We think it's crazy that so many people who believe in the tenets of feminism are still afraid to call themselves feminists. Feminism doesn't get the respect it deserves. Women's rights, civil rights, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender rights, and Black Lives Matter are the great human rights movements of our times.
Feminists like us who believe in intersectionality fight for all human rights. No one is free until everyone is free.
Feminism is changing the world. It's revolutionizing human thought, giving many people lives their great-grandparents could never have imagined. But there's still so much work to do. There are so many countries worldwide where LGBTQ people and women have little or no human rights.
90% of transgender employees have faced discrimination or harassment at work. In the US, no federal law protects them, even though nearly 80% of voters support such a law. Then there's rampant sexism in the tech industry, including the harassment of female gamers. And what about the gender earning gap that the US Congress refuses to move against?
Violence and abuse against women, gay, and transgender people is still a huge international problem. From gang rape in India to kidnappings in Nigeria to sexual slavery by ISIS to the negligible punishment given out for domestic violence in America. Trans women are assaulted and even murdered in the US.
But despite all this bad news, feminist resistance movements are exploding all over the world. Let's make the F word feminism the F word for the future. Let's all join together with feminists on the right side of history.